The interesting thing is precisely to say what is agreed not to be said. André Gide. Gide was right. What is interesting for a writer is precisely to say what everyone has agreed not to say. But the interesting can also be dangerous. In last week's article, for example, I gave 2 tips as interesting as they were forbidden. First, Federal Deputy Alberto Fraga, PMDBDF, claims to have conclusive proof of financial aid given to the PT in the last elections by the Colombian guerrilla. He now has 88 signatures on his request for the establishment of a CPI, Parliamentary Inquiry Commission, on the matter. Second, all neo-Nazi, neo-fascist, and anti-Semitic movements in the world are aligned with the Saddamist or anti-Bush cause, whose apostles, by calling the adversaries by those very names, do nothing but imitate Stalin's example, who camouflaged his alliance with Hitler behind a facade of anti-Nazism, all the grandiloquence and histrionics being all the more consciously feigned. Given these facts, retaliation was not long in coming. My death sentence, which before arrived discreetly by email, began to be published, without the slightest inhibition, on internet sites. These are open calls to leftist militants to get rid of me as soon as possible, preferably by cruel and painful methods. Yes, comrades, writes one of my virtual executioners. This is exactly what I'm talking about. Lynching, summary trial, and execution, without right of defense. This human scum is not part of the solution, but part of the problem. And whoever is part of the problem must be physically eliminated. A fascist has no right to speak or be heard. To silence their voice, we must identify them and, if not kill them outright, cut their hands so they can no longer expose their ideas in writing, and cut their tongues so they can no longer express themselves verbally. More meticulous, the site Media Independent informs interested parties of the place where I give classes at regular intervals, and, repeating hundreds of times the refrain, "Death to Olavo de Carvalho," suggests, isn't it more than time to put an end to this cancer called Olavo de Carvalho? Why not call for a demonstration in front of this course's location and, if possible, physically eliminate this fascist, racist, scoundrel, and miserable person? How lovely it is to hear these adjectives from the mouths of those who march alongside skinheads for the destruction of the State of Israel. How touching it is to read the appeal for my cruel elimination and, a few lines further, to discover that it is, in the opinion of its supporters, part of a campaign against intolerance. Sick. If, as a child, I had been told that I would live to witness such a thing, I would not have believed it. But it must be progress. Tired of sending me threats which I answered with swear words, as well as spreading false messages in my name that any sensible reader could identify at first glance as childish forgeries, the boys thought it was time for an upgrade, or, as Mao Zedong would say, a qualitative leap in the proletariat struggle. They moved from whispers to screams, from warnings to the preparation of an attack. Even more wonderful is to know that these lunatics are only putting into practice the teachings received from intellectuals and educators who, far from the truculent scene, elegant and powdered in their chairs and newspaper columns, embody the living personification of civilized coexistence and good feelings. The ineffable Dr. Antonio Candido, for example, I mention him at random, as one among thousands, said there was no harm in suspending rights and guarantees for a time if it was to build socialism. Well, here it is, Dr. Antonio, you did not wait in vain. The boys from Media Independent have already suspended at least my rights and guarantees. It is not socialism yet, but it is something. Of course, Dr. Antonio, or anyone in his place, will say that he did not intend to go that far. Leftist intellectuals never want to get where they get. They never wanted the Gulag, the Laogai, the extinction of Ukrainians by hunger, the million Tibetans killed. They never wanted any of what they produced. It was all the fault of damn coincidences. They, the owners of good intentions, always come out clean, no matter what they do. Now, for example, they campaign against the American intervention, but say they are not in favor of Saddam Hussein. No, they are not. They are only against removing him from power. They are against preventing him, by force or any other means, for they also abhorred economic sanctions, from continuing to kill Iraqis in peace, at a rate of 110 per day, far more than the war, as he has done for 24 years. They do not defend Saddam Hussein, but Iraqi sovereignty, that is, Saddam Hussein's sovereignty. Who can demand consequences from these creatures for their words, if those words are already in consequence itself? Who can hold accountable creatures who give themselves the right to dream of a new world in their own image and likeness, and never recognize as their own work the hideous shape of the realized dream? To whom should I then turn for protection? To the authorities of a government to which, precisely, the Candidos entrusted the realization of their most beautiful hopes? To those whom Deputy Fraga accuses of receiving money from the largest homicidal organization in Latin America? Crazy, yes, but not stupid. I prefer to admit that I no longer have any rights, no guarantees. What use are rights and guarantees entrusted to the care of people more interested in protecting the FARC against the Colombian government than Brazilian citizens against the FARC?